Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. This is the 10th talk that we're having as part of our EPIC seminar series, and we're honored to have Mr. Anil Jain with us. So, EPIC is the Energy Policy Institute at the University of Chicago. And we're basically a think tank that has been working on energy and environmental policies and economics as well. Um, During our projects as a think tank, we have been working closely with the central and the state governments. We have been working with MOEF, with CPCB, with the state utilities of Rajasthan, Maharashtra, um, Karnataka, to name a few. And recently, of course, we have also been engaged with NITI Aayog. Um, One of the things that we enjoy doing, of course, is to have EPIC serve as sort of a forum of ideas, which is why we conduct these sessions. And we have also been getting support recently from the Tata Trust, and EPIC is now part of the Tata Center of Development. Um, One of our flagship events over the past year has been the Delhi Innovation Challenge, where we have been working closely with the Delhi government in the first of its kind sort of partnership, where we are trying to crowdsource ideas to deal with things like pollution. And these we got over 250 idea and entries, and now we are going to announce the finalists on the upcoming Friday, which is the 21st. And it would be amazing if you guys could join us as well then. And it's we are also expected to have the chief minister over here. um, so I think now I've shamelessly advertised EPIC in enough. So I will get on to the main speaker. We are honored that he is here. I know he has a very hectic schedule. Shri Anil Jain sir is a member of the IESS of the 1986 batch from MP. He holds a bachelor's in economics and MBA and a diploma from the Indian Institute of Foreign Trade. He has published a number of books, articles, and papers on the energy sector, especially on natural gas. He has a really good paper by the Oxford Press on natural gas, and it is definitely a must read. Mm, Over the past 2.5 decades, he has had administrative experience in the field of policy in various state and central governments. Between 2003 and 2008, as the director and joint secretary in MOPNG, he was closely involved with the policy formulation and implementation of the gas sector in India. Um, he is currently the advisor on energy, climate seas, and climate change and overseas engagements at the NITI Aayog. And one of the most amazing projects that Anil Jain has done is where he led the team to make the IESS tool, which is the India Energy Security Scenarios, where they have prepared long-term energy demand and supply of India, and we'll be honored to have him speak to us about this. Anil Jain sir is also a part-time di- director on the board of NPCIL and GTNFW and NGO. Okay, thank you, sir.
Good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I was told that this is a 1.5 hour seminar, 1 hour lecture and half an hour question answers. So one is used to 1 hour, 2 hour long meetings, but not 1 hour lectures. So it'll be a challenge. But I think the idea is to, as Pooja said, that and as the topic here reads, India's energy trajectory, what could the next 20 years look like? Now, let me jump into it straight away. That's better. I think this is the real name of the topic. So what might India's energy demand be, and what might be the production of oil, gas, renewables, biomass, electricity, etc. In the year 2047, which is the terminal year of this tool, or in the next 20 years, could be actually anybody's guess. And unfortunately, because of lack of an in-house modeling tool or projection tool in the government, which may be because of several reasons, one of them being that we don't have an integrated energy ministry. To my mind, India has not really worked towards a planned energy transition. It's a very loaded statement, but I'm making it in a very casual manner, that the first time that India really looked upon energy in an integrated manner, because at the end of the day, the light which is on, or the electricity that you're receiving in this room, could come from any of the energy sources. It little matters to people sitting in this room that this has come from solar or wind or biomass or coal-based generation. So a nation has to plan what is the best possible mix of its energy sources. We all started, the whole world started with fossil fuels. But due to so many reasons, one of them could be resource endowment, another could be pricing, third could be probably the sustainability aspect, the emissions. Countries have planned transition. Japan is a classic case. After the 73, 74, the oil crisis, Japan really sharply cut down its oil demand. But in the case of India, if you see over the last 2 or 3 decades, I may not have seen even beyond that, it is perhaps the last 2, 3 decades that these new technologies started surfacing. India has not been able to get away from its classical energy mix. So if we have to, in the interest of our energy security, in the interest of making energy security, let us look in a diversified manner. Over here, this tool, we worked around import dependence as the classic definition of energy security. But actually, energy security should mean much more than that. It should mean assured supply of energy at all times. And as the integrated energy policy has defined it, assured supplies of energy to all its citizens at affordable prices, free, devoid of supply and price risks. So if you have to do that, then some kind of projections as to what are the natural strengths of India, what are the emerging technology trends, they have to be captured somewhere. So as I mentioned, that due to lack of an internal tool within the government, we were actually all informed by IEA, or maybe the World Bank, or maybe the IMF, or maybe our TERI studies. And having been a civil servant for about 30 years now, more than that, when you try to carry those messages within the government across ministries, it's very easy to torpedo them. Somebody might say that, oh, this agency has this vested interest, and have they factored in this thing, have they factored in that? So I don't want to get into all those details, because having myself done some bit of modeling, the kind of problems which all of you face, even I have seen them. So it was with this idea that in the year 2012-13, in the Planning Commission era, we thought that let us have a government's own tool. It may not be the perfect of the tools, because the future is unknown, but at least you will have some basis of talking to ministries, talking to departments, etc. So this is how we started. So today, when I take you through its projections, don't get stuck on the numbers, because let me tell you, if any one of you, some of you may have used this tool. This tool was only it's a machine. It doesn't have any attitude. If you think that India is going to go very heavy on solar because we have 300 clear sunny days and solar prices are really falling, and battery technology will come, so issues of integration, etc. So go ahead. And today, because this tool provides you with the capability of introducing how much? 650 gigawatts of solar, 650 gigawatts of wind in the year 2047. So if you want that all India's electricity and energy demands can be met by renewable, go ahead. You can use this tool to produce that much. But if you feel that India will be very heavy on coal, because the government has anyway announced 1.5 billion tons by 2020, and once having reached that, there's no stopping us, and all the classic argument that our per capita emissions are very little, so I mean, we are not responsible for the global emissions, we will do what is best for us, then go ahead. And China has said that by 2030 they will stabilize at 4 billion tons of coal production. Go ahead, and this tool will allow you to do that as well. So the projections here are not sacrosanct, and there is no government's position on that. But internally, we do take positions. So I will tell you what are the assumptions behind the two scenarios, the default case that we have taken, and what could possibly be done. So the idea behind, so what are those numbers then meant for? If it's all in thin air and I'm not standing by them, what is it meant to do? It's meant to stimulate debates. We can talk about that electric vehicles. India has said by 2020 we might have 6 to 7 million electric vehicles on the ground. So if you want to see that if we did have 6 to 7 million vehicles by 2020, how does that reduce the air pollution? How does that reduce the oil demand for the country? If you did 175 gigawatts of renewable by 2022, how does that impact on the total energy system? So this is a very strong advocacy tool. It's a very strong communication tool to engage with all of you and the common man. So there we are. So the idea behind this is that maybe in the half an hour or 40 minutes what we get to discuss, you can take away issues from this and ask me that what is the government doing about this, or what do you think about it. So here we are. Now broadly, I will take you through this tool. When we developed the projections, we factored in the government's agenda. It's a government agency which did this tool, so we had to factor in 175 gigawatts, we had to factor in 2022, housing for all, power for all, 24/7 by 2022, India's other aspirations, GDP growth rate aspirations, so they have been factored in, and so I will talk about the development ambitions and key objectives of the India's energy strategy, what is the government strategy, let's say energy efficiency, what are our strategies. In the case of biomass, what is our strategy? The Petroleum Ministry is talking of ramping up the share of ethanol, moving to second generation ethanol, clean cooking fuel for everybody. So those strategies have been factored in, and then I will come to the modeling results and talk about what might be the impact on the demand side, on the electricity, etc., etc. This is just an opening slide. This is only meant to set the context. This sets the context that look at where India is vis-a-vis the rest of the world. The numbers are pretty dated, it's 2011 or 12, but the world has moved in the right direction, and India may have also improved. So what are the takeaways from this? We do know that the energy use per capita is very little. Now you see the first box and you see the third box, the electricity consumption one. Now what do you notice? That in terms of energy use, per capita, no, I wanted to show you this one and this one. So if you notice, in terms of the per capita energy, let us say vis-a-vis the world, we are 1/3, 614 and 1890. But when you see the electricity one, we are nearly 1/5, which means that our energy is largely non-electric. Now electricity and hydrogen, as they say, are the two cleanest sources of energy, at least at the point of consumption. I mean, this energy may be coming from a big coal-based plant, but over here there is no pollution. So, we have to electrify energy demand. If we electrify, then all the renewable that we produce can be deployed in that. So that is a very, that has a strong message for us, that India has to increase the share of energy, and not only that, India has to ramp up its electricity. CO2 emissions, of course, are well known. Now look at the second box below that. Now that is electricity from fossils. Now we have a very high share of electricity coming from fossils. Now looking at the global trends, that is a slightly higher number. So that might have a message for all of us. But in energy use in terms of GDP, which is the energy intensity, we are below the global average, but not too bad. With OECD as well, we are only slightly above. So we shouldn't be too much bothered about the way our energy is being used. So this sets the paradigm for the interventions which all of you as Indians and otherwise policymakers, advisors might like to keep in mind. These are development indicators. Now moving to India's development ambitions at 100 years of India's independence. Now these are the assumptions which have been adopted, that when you are trying to meet the energy demand, you are naturally influenced by your desire for well-being. Now how do we define our well-being? We define our well-being, we'll have a population of 1.7 billion, and urbanization will go up to 51%. We probably might have a 7.4% CAGR, and the manufacturing share in the GDP will go up from 16 to 34%. And these are the other indicators. These indicators have actually been borrowed into the development strategy. Let me tell you that these are not very ambitious. In fact, many of you might feel that these are very low ambition. Why do I say that? The residential floor space per capita square meter, we were at about 11, and we have factored in 33. Now 33 square meters per capita is actually much lower than China and many other countries. But we wanted to be a little bit moderate in our expectations, because we have a long way to go, and similarly the electricity consumption. Now India's energy strategy. This is a slide which actually I have borrowed from the work that we are doing on creation of the National Energy Policy. Now in the National Energy Policy, and we feel that will inform some of the other issues that we are tackling, if you notice, affordability, energy security and sustainability, these three are the standard objectives of any country's energy policy. But you will notice that in the present context, the NITI Aayog leadership and others have felt that economic growth has to be very much a part of the energy objectives, because we do want to be an energy self-sufficient nation, but energy has a very close relationship with the GDP. In fact, there was a superior of mine a couple of years back who felt that when the coal production fell one year, the GDP also came down. So that was a very simple arithmetic, because just like we say that there is an energy intensity there is elasticity of energy vis-a-vis the GDP, so it works both ways. So if the energy supply is not sustained, then the GDP growth rate will also not happen. So for economic growth, you need the right volumes of energy at the right price, at the right place. So economic growth is also one of the inherent objectives of our energy policy. Now we feel that there are two diagrams I'm going to give you. One is on demand, another is on supply. That broadly, if you capture the entire energy demand scenario on one slide, then you take these classic 5 demand sectors: industry, cooking, transport, buildings and agriculture. On the demand side, we feel that the interventions will come in the 3 sectors, 3 broad areas. Energy efficiency, because energy efficiency can make your economy efficient, and not only does it reduce energy demand, but also makes you more efficient. Then you need investment. You need investments in the energy. I'm only talking of the energy-related investments. If you have to become efficient in an industry, you may need to make investments in the industrial sector. On the cooking side, you may have to provide for electricity and piped natural gas, make investments in the infrastructure and stuff like that. So, on the transport side, on the building side, and on the agriculture side. So this is the overarching umbrella under which probably the national energy policy should flow around. So these are the ones which are also captured in the tool. Now on the supply side, these are the supply sources, and if you divide them classically into upstream, midstream and downstream, then you need to make sure that your exploration and domestic production is in a good shape, your capacity and generation of electricity and midstream, downstream. So all these aspects have to be taken care of, because a complete energy strategy for a country must have interventions across the board on energy. Well, this may not capture the entire remit. It may not capture, let us say, regulatory practices. It may not capture the taxation practices, the fiscal policy. It may not capture, the country's policy to provide energy access and stuff like that. It may not capture, what are you doing about your INDCs. But whatever you want to do in INDC, you will then do it on the renewable energy, or you will do it on the energy efficiency. Somewhere or the other, this grid does capture what you wish to do. Now, we use the tool to tell us. So when we did this tool and did the projections for this presentation, we have taken a CAGR of about 7.4% between 2012 and 2047. So you notice that we go up, and like in any other economy, you mature and then you start stepping down. So this is the trajectory, but the tool provides you 3 GDP scenarios. So if you wanted to use a higher GDP, the tool provides you can choose that, and accordingly the projections will come. And the population, as I had mentioned earlier, 1.7 billion. Now this has been taken from Population Foundation of India projections. So we have done energy related work, but the other related aspects we have picked up from authorities. So Population Foundation of India, I think, has 2 series. So we have picked up one of them. And the urbanization has been taken accordingly. So the projections factor in the government's announcements. There's a government's announcement that there will be power for all by 2022, housing for all by 2022, 175 gigawatts of renewable energy, 100 smart cities, and the meeting of our indices by 2030. So the energy related implications of all these assumptions have been factored into this tool, because we want to meet the government's announcements across the board. Now, when I take you through the projections, you will see that there will be 2 scenarios. One is the reference scenario, and the other is the moderate carbon plus energy security. Now, what does the reference scenario, if you remember the tool, it's all level 2s on the demand side. What it means is that on energy efficiency on the demand side, we presume that the present state of play, let us say there is a PAT scheme. So whatever are the PAT ambitions as announced, they will be met. Whatever are the LED related announcements on the domestic scene, they will be met. Well, there is something superior to PAT, which is what you call BAT, best available technologies. Now, in the other scenario, the comparator, we have heightened the adoption of energy efficiency measures. So this is the best that can be done, and this is the moderate activity. It is not policy failure. It is government's policies are met. But when we say moderate carbon plus energy security, we feel that energy security in terms of import dependence comes when India uses lots of coal. So in this scenario, we use more coal than we use in this scenario, but at the same time, we also ramp up, since it's a moderate carbon, it moderates carbon vis-a-vis this one, there is a higher renewable energy component here. What gets reduced here is actually oil, because we are aiming towards energy security. So since we don't envisage lots of oil production in India, we cut down on oil consumption. So these are the 2 scenarios. It considers moderate penetration of renewable and clean energy, but it does meet the government's target of 175 gigawatts. It does meet the indices for 2030, but this overachieves in all of that. So the 2 comparators are the ones here. Now let us see what happens. When we do this, we notice that in the reference scenario, whereas we had a demand of about 5,500 terawatt hours in 2012, In 2012, we had a delivered or the energy demand not generated, but met at the consumer's end of about 5,500 terawatt hours, which is roughly about 550 million tons of oil equivalent. We feel that in 2047, by adopting only moderate energy efficiency measures, our demand may become nearly 4 times, which is around 18,000 terawatt hours. But if we adopted heroic measures on the demand side, it can be brought down to 14,682, which means about more than 25%, because that will be 4,500. So roughly nearly 25% of the energy demand can be brought down. 21% is the number given there. So what will be the reduction in separate sectors? In industry, it can be brought down by this number, in transport by this number, in buildings by this number, and in telecom sector by this number. Now, those of you who know the tool, or you can go back to the tool, it tells you exactly how this number can be achieved. It will tell you how much reduction can be achieved in steel, how much reduction can be achieved in cement, how much of it can be achieved in aluminum. So the major industrial sectors have been captured in over there. And the assumptions, which means how will this come down? It will not come down because of reduction in demand for the industrial products. Let us presume that the level of service, the amount of steel needed by India, the amount of cement needed by India is not going to get reduced, because we are energy people. We are not doing the economic modeling, we have done the energy modeling. So this can be brought down by improvement in the specific energy consumption per unit of the output. Similarly, in transport, I will do, now the next slides are going to be deep dives. I'll go down into transport and tell you how this number has been achieved. So this gives you, as I mentioned, that a topic for discussion would be that what does India need to do in industry? This basically tells you that industry offers the maximum scope for reducing energy. Maybe we need to have a more ambitious PAT. In fact, in NITI Aayog, we have always felt that PAT is not ambitious enough. PAT needs to be pushed up. So this is the debate which this engenders. And in transport sector also, there is a big scope. Within the transport, what is the breakup in freight and passenger? We will just discuss. And by merely reducing the energy demand on the demand side, if you notice in the bottom panel, it tells you that India's import dependence can be brought down, which would otherwise go up to 51%, it can be brought down to 43%. Now on import dependence, just one small comment, that in 2012, our import dependence was 31%. Now this 31% includes biomass. Our total energy consumption was something like 720 from the supply side, as I mentioned. On the demand side, actually delivered was 550. On the supply side, it was 720 MTOE, of which about 175, 25% was actually biomass. So this is one thing which I wanted to share with all of you, energy interest people here, that whenever we do the energy related work, please, in the Indian context, you must include biomass. Because I have noticed that most of the Western projections, since they use only commercial fuel, they don't take care of biomass. India has a big opportunity in biomass because we are an agricultural nation, and since we have to feed so many millions and billions, our agricultural production will keep going up, and then you will keep getting lots of biomass. There should be a big discussion that how to value add biomass, how to it's being used as a solid biomass. How can we gasify it? How can we liquefy it? So 31% of our total energy supply was imported, and if things were not set, the houses was not set in order, it would go up to 51%, and by merely reducing the energy demand, we can become energy secure by that number. Now I get you into the passenger I split the transport sector. Let me go back and tell you, in transport sector, you have noticed that the reduction can be by 817. Now, very quickly, let me show you the next slide. In this, we have spoken of the passenger transport. In passenger transport, we can bring it down from 2377 to 1771, which is roughly about 600. And then the next one is freight. From there, we come down. So it's about 800. So 800 is the reduction. And so is here if you notice that in transport, 817 is there. So this 817 breakup I will discuss with you in the next two slides. In the passenger transport section, where the reference demand would be 2,400 terawatt hours or so, by merely improving the way cities are planned, the new cities which are being planned, just like Shuchao in China, where people walk or cycle from their place of work from home to work. Similarly, if India could, instead of people from Gurgaon traveling to Delhi, and I heard Dr. Leena Srivastava mention one day that just the Rent Control Act itself can make a big impact on the amount of traveling you do from your home to your work. She was saying that she has a house in Gurgaon, but doesn't want to give it on rent because she's not sure whether she'll get it back when she wants. So she'd rather live in it and commute to Delhi every day. And people in Delhi, do vice versa. So transit-oriented development has the biggest impact on reduction in demand in passenger transport. And railroad share, of course, in railroad share actually you can have a much bigger reduction, but the Ministry of Railways was insistent that please don't give us a much bigger share because they are belaboring under whatever that. So this is, it's an admission that this is a government tool which doesn't talk just about theoretical numbers. We have also factored in what the ministries were in support of, and shift to public transport and share of electric vehicles and fuel cell vehicles. So this is the scenario of passenger transport. Now let's come to freight. Now in freight, now just let me go back. You see there's a 25% drop in the passenger one, but in the freight, the possibility is only of 10%. Now, if you bring in the dedicated freight corridors and you move some of the traffic away from road to rail, and so this is the likely impact. So the takeaway is that there's a bigger opportunity in the passenger transport section vis-a-vis the freight transport. So this was a deeper dive into the number that I generated overall over there. Now to get into residential buildings. Now residential buildings I have dealt separately and commercial buildings separately. Now in the residential buildings, in the reference scenario, your demand would be somewhere there, and then you can bring it down by 23%, which is a very big number. We saw in the transport, it was about 20% or so, it's 23% here. Now this is urban planning. Urban planning, I would envisage whether you should have, FARs, you go tall or you go flat. Maybe that will have its implementations. But the big opportunity is in the efficient appliances. So efficient appliances, if you notice, the LED program has got such a big bonanza behind it. Similarly, if we were to cool roofs and this air conditioning demand of India, they say it would just go runaway demand the way it has happened in China. So in air conditioning, if we were to improve the standards, we can really bring down the demand. And in the case of commercial building, you see in the commercial buildings, we already have the ECBC to some extent in operation. In residential, we have not been able to apply it. So there, if you notice, the opportunity is there, but it is 11% reduction in the energy demand. So now moving away from the demand side, now let us come to the supply side. In supply side, the projections have been developed on these premises. In the electricity sector, we want a higher penetration of renewables. We want to electrify energy demand. In India, at the end of the consumer, only 16% of the total energy that we consume in India is actually of the electricity origin, whereas in the OECD, it is 25%, 26%. Globally, it is almost a quarter, 24%. This needs a bigger exercise to be done. Many people feel that since we do not use electricity for heating as much as many of the Western countries do, but then electrifying demand is the best way to reduce consumption of solid fuels. It is the best way to reduce your air pollution, and it is believed, engineers would know better, that electric engines, electric motors are much more efficient. Even electric traction is much more efficient in terms of energy to delivered service ratio. So electricity is an area where I think we need to work on, that how can India, especially in the present situation where the PLFs of the Indian electricity sector have dropped from nearly 75% in 2010 to presently almost 62%. So all this capacity that we are creating and renewables which are going to come in If we cannot find demand for that electricity, all these projects will be in a problem. And in the case of coal, what we mean is the coal-based power plants, because they are the biggest consumers of coal. So how can we improve the thermal efficiency from subcritical to maybe ultra-supercritical and IGCC, enhance domestic production, crude, again, enhance domestic production in oil and gas. Out of the almost 3.17 million square kilometers of India's sedimentary basin, only 30-35% is well explored. So we haven't even explored our sedimentary basin so far. So whenever they say that, does India have oil and gas? We always say that we don't know. They've only explored a quarter of it well. So that is, and then we got embroiled in controversies of cost recovery and revenue sharing and gas pricing and oil pricing. So this needs to be fixed. And when we make projections, in the supply side, our projections are much more simpler because they are more on policy debate, that can India have a very well incentivized policy regime which brings in ExxonMobils and Chevrons and all these other companies to come and explore in India. And similarly for gas. So now on the production side, our modeling tells us that actually coal can go up from 233 to, this is in MTOE, I believe, I checked up, I think 1 ton of coal is equal to 0.7 tons of oil. So that is the ratio. But these numbers are for 2011-12, the 233. So presently, of course, we are more than about 600 million tons of coal. So these are for 11-12. And the 560, the projection is actually pre-government's announcement of, that humongous number of 1.5 billion tons. I wonder whether we can get there so quickly, especially in the light of the poor demand for coal these days. But fossil fuel production numbers are in this range. We are not very bullish on oil, if you notice, because the discoveries in the last 10 years or so, barring the discovery, those of you who follow the oil industry, since I have worked in petroleum sector, I know that better. In the case of oil, the only large discovery India has had in the last 15 years is the Cairns discovery in Barmer. But gas, we have had multiple discoveries, including KG Basin, ONGC has discovered, Reliance has discovered, and GSPC has discovered. So gas, we are very bullish. We feel that the production can go up 3 times, but there we are not very bullish. So now this is the strategy for liquid hydrocarbons. We've already seen the slides on demand reduction. Now that demand reduction was not fuel specific. I only discussed with you the sectoral demand reduction. Now when you reduce the energy demand in, let us say, in the household sector, then you basically reduce, let us say, you become LPG, chulha becomes more efficient, so you use a little bit less of LPG, you might reduce less of electricity. Now how does that impact on coal demand? How does that impact on the fuel mixes of the country? So now the next 3-4 slides are the reduction of energy demand by interventions on the demand side. How do they measure out in terms of fuels? Now this is for oil. As I said, next one will be on gas, and then it will be on coal. So within the oil and gas sector, naturally, the maximum reduction you can get is in transport, because that is where oil has the maximum usage. Now in the case of industry, what it might mean is that some of the industrial processes, let us say fertilizer might be using naphtha, which for ammonia purposes. So that is the one, and maybe some power generation by diesel, by demand reduction, the electricity demand comes down, so oil comes down. But in the other cases, in cooking, we are hardly using any real oil. But so there's a big bonanza here. So this tells you that if you want to improve the country's scenario for oil, transport is the sector to work on. Now, if you feel that India is not going to be able to produce lots of oil, and we may be dependent on Arab oil for a very long time, let's do something about it. So work on transport. This is what this slide tells you. Now, in the case of gas, again, it is industry where you can become more efficient, and when you become efficient, then the maximum reduction happens in industry. So maybe in industry, we need to be working about the PAT and try to see that how can we reduce the energy demand, and that is where if you reduce the energy demand in industry, the biggest bonanza you get is in terms of gas demand. Now this is for coal. Again, as I mentioned, that in the case of coal, it is industry which is using lots of solid fuel. This is now basically the blast furnaces. In the iron steel, where solid fuel is used, and in cement, where the rotary kilns, they're using coal. So if you were to, when you became efficient and reduce the specific energy consumption in iron, steel, and cement sectors, the maximum reduction happened in the industrial consumption of coal. So these are the 3 slides on that. At the end of the day, with your reduction in energy demand, your demand for electricity comes down from fossil fuel based to 50%. So in a way, this indicates that for 2030 we have indicated in our INDCs that the fossil fuel will be 60% and 40 will be non-fossil. So this tool, even without being very ambitious on the supply side, where we are using lots of coal, as I mentioned, because we want to get energy secure. We don't want to be highly energy import dependent. It tells you that your fossil fuel share can be brought down from 60% to 49% in 2047. But if you were able to produce lots of renewable and electrify your demand, you see, when we talk of renewable, a deeper analysis, which many of you would know, tells you that unless and until you can electrify your demand, producing lots of renewable will not help. So, and especially balancing. Otherwise, if you got to use gas in the evening, then again you're ending up with lots of fossil fuel. So this is one of the outcomes of this slide. Now, where is the electricity? Now, we discussed electricity is not a separate source. Electricity is actually being derived out of those 3 sources, solid, liquid, and gas, and maybe renewables, for which I did not have a slide. But when you did the demand reduction, only 9% reduction happened in electricity demand, because we are not using sufficient electricity. And if you notice in this slide, it tells you that the maximum reduction happens in efficient appliances in the residential sector. That is where the 365 terawatt hours reduction happens. And in agriculture, since we are pricing our electricity very low for the agriculture sector, there is no incentive to have efficient agricultural irrigation pumps. So if we were to work on that sector, you could get a reduction in the electricity demand over there. So mind you, so it is not the numbers game so much as the policy implications of these numbers which come towards us. And now supply side interventions. Here on the imports, now we generated certain imports in the reference scenario. In the reference scenario, as I mentioned, the energy demand goes up to more than 18,000 terawatt hours. Now, within the 18,000 terawatt hours, if you did not do the demand side interventions and bring it down to 14,000, the import component was nearly 12,000. So now we go about what is the impact of supply side interventions. So if you increase your oil production, you reduce your energy demand, your imports by this number. So the maximum reduction in the overall energy import scenario in India actually comes from domestic coal. So if you see the bottom panel, it tells you that if you did only supply side interventions, India's import dependence can be brought down to 42%. Well, it's besides the point that if you reduce your energy demand by adopting heroic measures, level 4 on the demand side, you reduce the energy demand and then you also bring about the supply side intervention, then your imports hover around not more than 30-35. So the beauty of this tool, and we have to thank Vaibhav also in some way, because this was first developed by UK DEC and we adopted because this is modular. So you can see the impact of each little intervention on the supply side, on the demand side, on what is the impact of shift from solid fuel in industry to liquid fuel or to gas, what is the impact of bioenergy. This tool has got a very strong component of bioenergy, in which we have even gone ahead and discussed microalgal and macroalgal and hydrogen, because in the years to come those technologies will make a difference. So you need to capture these tools. As I mentioned, that this bioenergy supply is basically talking about if we were to gasify Now, lots of biomass is used up as solid fuel with a very low thermal efficiency. If we were to use the same biomass and gasify it or liquefy it, then this is the impact, because this reduces, and this directly reduces oil imports. Because if you liquefy it, it can, the government is down 10% ethanol blending, and the Brazilian case of 80-85, you can keep raising this. So supply side interventions, how do they reduce our imports is here. Now we come to, as I mentioned, 30-35%. If you were to reduce your, if you were to make demand side reduction in the reference scenario, this is the amount of import reduction which happens. So this is the demand side interventions, and these are supply side interventions. So if you combine both efforts on the demand reduction and increasing your supply, then your imports are just 34%. So as I mentioned that you've gone about the tool talking of demand side intervention, supply side intervention, and you combine the two, and this is the energy pathway which this develops for you. And even on the emissions, if you notice that it brings out nearly a 20% reduction between the reference and the intervention scenario. That is where you are. So what might be India's energy mix if all these interventions were made? So here you are in 2012, you were using 46%. Now the interesting thing to notice is that since this was an energy security scenario, we ramped up coal percentage. So, well, it is up to the policy maker whether to define energy security in terms of import dependence, because many people feel that in an interdependent world where there's so much of trade and we're all going to become one, there isn't any need to worry about energy supplies, that the Gulf problem and Straits of Hormuz will close. So have a more rational energy security scenario, then you could reduce this. But and then you notice that it's basically this component of renewables which is making an impact, and it is coal which is making the impact between the reference scenarios and that scenario. In oil, we reduce because we want to be more energy secure, so we reduce our oil. So this is the as I mentioned, that a summation of the total story. So I think this is where I end, and I end with what I started, that there is a need to debate the energy pathway which India ought to take, and sometimes it's a problem because there are separate ministries, and each ministry is pressing its own pedal. Coal wants to open up more coal mines, and renewable wants to go gung-ho on whatever. They should be doing that, and petroleum is again pressing the pedal. So this supply mindset that India has not been able to produce sufficient energy is good, but then I think one energy should give way to another. As I mentioned, that Japan is a classic case, where I think in the 70s they were importing almost 70% of their energy demand was from oil side, and today I think it's less than a quarter. So similarly in India, now that people say that on calorific terms, oil and gas prices were very strongly indexed to each other, and over the last 4 to 5 years now they have diverged. So for 1 million BTU of heat which is produced from oil and it's produced from gas, if it were to produce from gas, there is almost a 15 to 20% price differential. So theoretically, if India was to replace, and gas can be put to almost all usages to which oil can be put. Oil is used in transport, CNG can be used there, oil is used for, let us say, you take out LPG, you can use PNG for cooking, and you use oil and its derivatives for power generation. Gas can be used for power generation. So gas can theoretically replace all the usages to which oil is put. And presently, the share of gas in India's energy mix is little more than 6% or so, whereas share of oil is about 29 to 30%. So theoretically, if you were to replace all the oil by gas, your economy will be substantially more efficient in terms of money. spent on energy. So this tool, I would say, would be happy if if it engendered a debate and we made transitions towards that sector. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Gaurav. I'm pursuing PhD from JNU. I'm working on environmental economics. So, and I'm like, and there's a research work going on energy projection. So I'm working on that as well. So I have a question there. The renewable and clean energy. So is it basically for electricity generation or overall use of renewable energy?
Bioenergy has been given separately over here. Now, renewables would be wind. What are the sources? It will be wind, solar, and clean energy. When we say, it also includes nuclear. So nuclear is, of course, all electricity. Hydro is all electricity. Wind, solar. I think, yeah, this is all for electricity.
And so the increase in coal in 2047 to 52%. So that is because of increase in domestic production. Because we are talking about import dependence.
Yes. Because in this scenario, you are anyway, in this scenario, your import dependence, if I showed you in the last slide, is anyway post-intervention, it is only 34%. So import dependence in this scenario is 51, and in the other scenario, it is 34%. So that is why the coal share has gone up, and we have reduced oil.
Yeah.
So this oil demand may be getting met by bioenergy, where we have gone up from 6% to 9%.
That means, say for example, in the process heat, you need a lot of, you can also use solar energy for process heat. So that is not considered when you are considering this renewable.
No, I think that has also been considered. That is also, there is in the tool, there is a horizontal entry of its use in cooking and its use in industry. That is also there. Actually, this is a message drawn out. But actually, if you go into the Excel sheet, which is also loaded in for public consumption, you will notice exactly where all this heat is going.
Mahendra Sethi, National Institute of Urban Affairs. You've rightly mentioned that there are a lot of opportunities for cities in renewable energy, both from the demand side as well as energy efficiency in the demand side as well as the supply side. Right? Now, what according to you are the policy and market related roadblocks in pursuing this at the city level?
At the city level, you mentioned that there are lots of opportunities on the demand side and also on the supply side. Now, on supply side, what do you mean? Cities, solar rooftops on homes, and setting up decentralized gas-based generation, and also waste to energy. So that was not very clear to me. On demand side, I can understand. On the supply side, within the cities, these solar PVs, yeah. Now, WT, yeah. WTE actually, if I remember correctly, if the country's entire municipal solid waste, were to be harnessed for power generation, my number may be here and there, it's not more than 10,000 megawatts. So WT actually offers a big opportunity for saving landfills and clearing the waste in an environmental friendly manner. So there is not much of a energy because half of it is, I think, there's some numbers that half of it is non-biomass, the municipal solid waste. Whatever is biomass, half of it is wet. So in terms of calorific value, so that is one part of the story. Now, what are the bottlenecks on the demand and supply sides? You see, on the demand side, of course, these are transit-oriented development, as I mentioned, that it's very difficult for older cities. Now, India has a very high level of urbanization in its older cities. So let's try and do Delhi. I mean, it's so many of these Western countries have urbanized, over the last 30, 40 years. So they had an opportunity to develop new cities, US particularly. Now, in the case of India, it's very difficult to segregate the workplaces from homebound places. And then, one instance I've given you is the Rent Control Act. How to assure home builders that, they can build homes and rent out for people to stay in. And on the power generation side, the solar rooftops, we are still grappling with issues of, prices. If the net metering policy which we are introducing, so that home dwellers can be encouraged to install and consume their own generation. So the discoms are having problems, because usually if you have a big roof, you may be having a large consumption, and you'll be in the bracket of 8 to 9 rupees or 7 rupees kilowatt hour tariffs. So discoms are going to push back, and that is a problem which even the developed countries are facing, even in California and other places. So, and what are the other energy implications in an urban space? Let us say cooking, transport. So in the case of your transport, if you were to bring in a metro, if you were to bring in, let us say, electric mobility, then the problems which Delhi faced when it introduced your CNG in the year 2002, 3, 4, 5 onwards, Supreme Court had to come down. There was the EPCA, Burelal Committee and others, to get space to set up the CNG stations, to lay the pipelines for because in India, the ground level issues become very, very challenging. So let us say now, if you bring in electric vehicles, there is a big issue at hand that charging stations, where will they be? And when an electric vehicle goes into charge, there's a very heavy drawl from the grid. Will it destabilize the grid? So I think the biggest challenge, if I was to find a common denominator across all that I have said, that you need to have, just like somebody was saying, that a smart city is basically one where smart people live in. So if you want a smart energy solution for our cities of India, then you need the energy knowledge and a desire and energy objective built into the basic dynamics of the city. Today, we are so much compartmentalized that the Urban Development Ministry will probably be looking more at city planning, etc. They will not be looking at energy solutions. So I think just like in transport, they've started saying that if you want to bring electric mobility, then you must have electric charging. You must have, an incentive to manufacture, because electric vehicles are expensive and they cover money over time. So can the MORTH alone introduce a smart transport solution for India? It cannot do so without MOUD and others joining hand, and then the tariffs part of it, the Commerce Ministry, and so I think this is the biggest challenge to put a unified approach.
Hello, sir. My name is Kapil Narula. I work with the Indian Navy. Thank you for a very lucid presentation. My main question is about how does this tool feed into the policy makers? You did mention that you use the policy inputs into this tool, but one of the main issues, as you said, that all ministries are sort of acting independently. So do these energy source mix or energy mix which is presented in this tool, are there some targets which you supply to these ministries to follow them, or how does it work at the NITI Aayog as your role as an advisor to the various ministries? And the second point which I wanted to make is I would love to see, as an extension of this tool, some cost inputs which go in, so that when we look at these, we also get a feel of what are the implied costs if we need to look at, say, X% mix or efficiency.
Can we have the internet now? I think this is one gentleman.
Yeah. So these are two questions.
Yeah. On your first question, as I mentioned initially, that in India we have been accustomed to having our own ways. interministerial coordination is always a challenge. It's not only true for India, but for all the places. My friend, they
So
often
you
tell
want
us
to
from the US.
open up IESS?
IESS code region, yeah. So, the good thing is that slowly, in fact, when I went to UK in 2013 and to talk to the Department of Energy and Climate Change about this tool, and I met the permanent Undersecretary, head of the Department of Energy and Climate Change, he was himself saying that in UK itself, they have found it very difficult to induct this tool into their policy making. And but nevertheless, you'll be happy to hear that in India, this has already found traction. The INDCs, if you see, I think somewhere there is a number that India's electricity demand has been pegged at 2499 terawatt hours in 2030. Now that number I generated out of this tool and gave it to them. So when, it's a knee-jerk kind of a reaction. Our policy making is still, the act is not there, but we're slowly, steadily getting there. Now when you wanted in India to put the whole thing together, now what happened, I'll give you this example. MOFCC had to prepare the INDCs. Now they wanted somebody to tell them that what might be India's energy demand in 2030. Now they are climate change guys and they're forest people. Now they didn't have any way to find out. So they wrote to Ministry of Power that please tell us what might be India's total energy demand in 2030, because then we'll take out its mixes and this thing. Though they had commissioned 3 modeling agencies. So Ministry of Power said that, look, we are electricity guys. Now we don't know non-electricity demand, which means that they will have to go to coal, they'll have to go to petroleum, they'll have to go hither and thither. So they simply wrote to me that, can you help us out? So then I went and spoke to them that you cannot find out even your own electricity number without finding out the overall energy demand, because electricity can substitute other demand. So first you have to find out the total energy demand and then find out what share will be electricity. So they agreed. So then we did it for them using this tool. So, so here is the answer for you. And now I do hear that in various ministries, when there are meetings and they are facing some problems of generation and issues, let's say the other day they approached us, the Ministry of Power, that our PLF is falling. How can we find more demand for electricity? Now, well, various modeling approaches take place. This is one of them. So I won't say this is the best, final, this and that. When they did their 18th EPS, I think Ministry of Power, they came out with the results in 2012. So the numbers were for 17. In I think 13 or 14 itself the numbers went wrong. So sometimes, so this is slowly and steadily, it is getting entrenched. Last year we came out with the second version. Now on the cost part of it, you'll be happy to know that cost has already been worked into this. Yeah. So I will give you one, I'll show you where it is. Here it is on the top panel. You will find energy costs. Actually this tool has got, I mean it was developed by the Cambridge people, University of Cambridge. It's a fascinating tool. It's not a typical model. So that is the shortcoming. But then models we have plenty, and they are black boxes, you and I don't understand them. So this thing has got complete Excel, and this work was done by lots of knowledge people. It was done by Terry, it was done by Irade, it was done by C-Step, and so they are the ones who contributed. We assembled it all together. This tells you that what is the default cost, and this is the range of cost. So you will get all the cost-related information in this thing.
Hello, my name is Vaibhav. I've just joined EPIC this week as a Associate Director Operations Strategy. Earlier I was working with Mr. Jain on this same work when I was with the UK government. Thank you, sir, for the very interesting presentation. I just one question around cost as well. I mean, are there some really good messages coming out of this cost calculation? Because every policy debate or discussion on energy demand and supply boils down ultimately to cost and affordability per se in India, which probably says that, you see, in terms of going more energy secure or taking a more energy secure pathway or a more cleaner or low cost pathway for future, is it that the cost which comes up is slightly lower than the conventional pathway, which is more fossil fuel based? Or are there something like that which is coming up, like a message for the policymakers?
Look, Vaibhav, you know the answers. You want me to share that answer with others here? Yeah, this is a very interesting revelation which this tool has given, that actually cleaner and more efficient pathways are actually cheaper in the long run. So this is very interesting. But then I think the Kirit Parikh report also came up with the same. So you can't deny it that over a period of 25 years or 30 years, if you model in rising cost of fossil fuel, gas, and because they are scarce fuels, they are limited supplies. So and there may be carbon taxation. If you bring in carbon pricing and all, which we didn't do, then the price of fossil fuel is expected to be going up. But then many people feel that prices will come down as well because the prices of coal, and I don't know how to factor in that's a econometrics, etc. How to factor in the global commodity slump where everything has become cheaper. So if you were to have long-term projections where the prices of coal, oil, and gas keep getting more expensive, and the prices of solar technologies and wind keep falling, because that's again a conjecture, and modelers believe that new technology prices come down when time passes. So naturally they will keep getting cheaper, but they are very lumpy in their expenditures. So if you want to put up a wind turbine, you want to put up a solar panel, lots of capex is involved. So capex, so if you are trying to lead to a question that why doesn't India just jettison all this and go for all this, there's a very huge cost involved. So if you remember, even Dr. Kirit Parikh's LCIG report said that by adoption of I think one was BIG and the other was LCIG. So by adoption of LCIG, it will transfer a lot of resources from other productive measures to these energy efficiency and clean energy measures, which will deny the economy of investment and productive sources and bring down our GDP. So he pitched that if there was international funding available to cover this deficit. So they did GDP and all. We didn't do GDP, I mean, in all this. So I'm not trying to say that India should just get onto this. The impact of adopting clean energy measures on the other sectors of the economy have not been caught in this. But if you just take energy per se, there is no denying that if you were to make investments in clean energy, energy efficiency, and depreciate them over a long period of time, then the annual energy, this tool actually, you will, in your cost, what this tool captures is the annual energy expenses of the economy. So it doesn't go into capex. What it does is it takes the capex and suffers it over the lifetime. So what will be the impact of that capex for that year? It captures that, and it captures variable cost. So that is, of course, it's a good finding.
Hi, I'm Harsh. Harsh Singh from Roland Berger. It's a global consulting firm. We work with a lot of auto OEMs on their technology roadmaps, a lot of issues related to this. But the question I have is nothing to do with transportation. I'm looking at nuclear, and it's largely been ignored, or potentially maybe I don't see the numbers. But what is the strategy around nuclear, and why does it seem to generally be much lower down in our priority scale?
So I'm Jessica from Okapi. It's a Chennai-based strategy firm that looks at these kinds of issues that deal with government, business, and community action. So the question I had was actually about the transition, because in the beginning you started this off with the importance of bringing a unified approach and of having kind of a credible estimate of where we are now, where we could go. But in the middle, it seems like being able to credibly lay out the steps in that unified approach and assign them across ministries and across levels of government is something that only NITI Aayog could do. And I was wondering if there are any plans to have a follow-on kind of report that looks at transition costs. I mean, each of these changes is a fairly massive system change in terms of location of infrastructure, provisioning for transmission, provisioning for gas movement. I mean, there's a significant transition cost that the market itself will not take care of by itself. But are there any plans to do a follow-on report specifically about that transition and the steps, and to sort of herd the cats, as it were, to bring some of these scenarios into being?
It's a related question. So, Rekha Krishnan from Weft Research. Just to understand what is your stand in terms of looking at subnational security scenarios and whether you see a value in doing that?
Yeah, so on the nuclear, there is a very strong component on that. And one feature of this tool is that there's a one-pager. So I've just opened the one-pager for you. So as I was explaining that this tool talks of 4 levels. Level 1 is essentially policy failure, and level 4 is the heroic, the maximum that India could ever have. So on the, you will see that if you opted for level 1, you would of course get hardly any nuclear. But if you opted for level 4, it goes up to humongous 78 gigawatts in the year 2047. But if you see the available literature on India's nuclear, trajectory, India's own uranium reserves, they say, are only sufficient to create a capacity of 10,000 megawatt or 10 gigawatts. So if we were to, so that is the first phase of pressurized, water, PWHRs. And if you were to move to the second phase, which is the PFBR, the fast breeder reactors, which we are still, the commercial one is still under implementation, which is able to produce its own fuel more than what it consumes, then the trajectory opens up. And the third phase is, of course, the thorium-based one, which is still in the R&D stage. So in the meanwhile, then India has entered into these, after the India-US nuclear accord, now we are going into these contracts with France and with Russia, with Japan, and Putin is likely to sign 2 of them, Kudankulam 5 and 6. So those are imported reactors with assured fuel supplies. So this, the projections here are actually more pragmatic. In this case, if you were to ask me, sir, that what have you factored in that fast breeder reactor will become very fastly commercial, or do you think that thorium technology will come in? No. Over here, we have been a little bit more pragmatic and looked at the land-related issues, that what are the cleared sites? The existing sites have some spare capacity. So this looks, and usually in the case of nuclear reactors, the past has been, we have taken very, very long time to be able to really bring one onto the ground. So between now and 2047, the likely scenarios have been captured here. Now, Jessica, on your question, well, no, it's not that we have, you see, the idea behind this tool was to get different ministries excited. And if Renewable Energy Ministry, MNRE, saw that the prospects could go up, from the present 40, 45, 47 gigawatt to maybe 1,300 gigawatts in 2047, and they put a small task force that what will be India's electricity demand, and can this kind of, renewable could be absorbed. But they have taken some steps, though it may not have been spurred by this exercise, the offshore wind proposal. So, this just does engender debates. It tells people some credibility that, look, it is possible that in the case of 2047, India's total, electricity demand, which is presently 1,200 terawatt hours, may go up to 7,500 terawatt hours. So within that 7.5 terawatt hours, Europe has got a statutory binding that they will have 80% of their energy coming from renewable sources. What if India, so create 3 scenarios. So, in a large economy like ours, where we have so much work to do in the energy domain, to get hooked up on 2047 immediately is very difficult. So that is there. And on the subnational thing, you'll be happy to know that our collaboration with the UK government has progressed well. In fact, this exercise of this calculator building was first developed by UK, as I said, and then I'm told maybe about 3 dozen countries have now taken it over. There's a subtle difference. This is not a copycat version of that, because the UK's calculator was driven by climate change considerations. So their essential drive was to generate, let's say in this case, let's say you have 3 implications. So if that is the energy demand, and you supply it in this manner, then the third graph was actually on emissions. So we said that no, we are not bothered about that. That is why this is called energy security calculator. We have generated that what might be, from 31%, we might go up there if those were the choices of the energy side. So this calculator, in fact, was adopted by many countries who were also worried about import implications. So, so they are very happy with the work that was done here, and they continue to support us in many ways. And one of them is that we are now wanting to reach out to 6 states. So Odisha calculator has been developed already, and Chhattisgarh they just sent me a letter that they wanted to do one, and I think another 6 to 8 states may have their state-specific calculators. Naturally, I mean, for them imports don't mean anything. They might like to do, like Chhattisgarh has got lots of coal and electricity. They might want to know how much of this electricity can be absorbed in ourselves, how much it will be available for export. Gujarat is dependent heavily on coal from here and there, oil and gas comes. They might want to see what will be our energy demand, how will we fulfill its requirement. So this has subnational wonderful implications, and I'm sure by and by.
My question is nuclear energy. Any assumption for thermal and uranium between 2047, or import reactor versus indigenous?
No, this is an energy security tool. What might be the various levels of supply of energy from a particular source? So, and what might be the energy demand to get into, because that is not a modeling. Those are, let the Department of Atomic Energy develop a nuclear specific calculator on that question arising out of this.
My name is Varun. I'm a project associate with ISC U Chicago. Within last 1 month, India has ratified the Paris Agreement, concentrating on the climate change issue. At the same time, even the Ministry of Coal has said that, the demand for coal has went down, and they want to increase the demand of the coal in the nation. So, as an energy policy maker, what do you think? Where does the trade-off happen between the climate change and the energy security? Because we are trying to, because both of them are quite correlated with the emissions and the climate change, and the energy security and the coal demand. So what's your take on that?
The INDC clarifies your question very well. India has not committed to a particular number. As I mentioned, that China has in its INDC said that I think they will plateau at perhaps 4 billion tons of coal consumption. India has not made any such commitment. What India has said is that we will reduce our energy intensity 33-35% of the GDP against 2005 by 2030. So if we have a very high GDP growth to meet our development ambitions, we might have higher emissions. If we have a low GDP, we will have a lower emission. So, and at the same time, by having spoken of 175 gigawatts of renewable, it naturally shows that we are also trying to make our transitions. So if we were not to have a high renewable agenda, then it would have sent a very strong, wrong message that we are oblivious of the climatic considerations. So, so your question is a very direct question, for which nobody, then there are diplomatic positions to be assumed, national considerations. Nobody will give you a direct answer. But what you can see is that in terms of, let us say, fuel standards, India is one of the few countries which has agreed to leapfrog from Euro 4 to Euro 6 by I think 2019 or 2020. And in the case of your coal technologies, we have decided that in the 12th plan period, we had 50% of the capacity which came in by supercritical, and in the 13th five-year plan, 17 to 22, we will not approve any new subcritical capacity. So across the board, in ethanol, this year, today's paper said that India's total purchase of ethanol will be almost 120 crore liters, which never exceeded more than 65 or 67 crore liters. So by all accounts, India is working towards And let's forget about climate change consideration. Let's look at our own air quality concerns within Delhi itself, SOx, NOx, particulate matter, etc. People are getting very worried. So if we do anything to clean our air, let us not be driven by the fact that we are doing it because of the INDC and will we fail that and will we do that. What we are doing it is for our own good and own health as well.
So I hope we will see you all on the 21st for our innovation challenge. And we're also having another talk on air pollution on November 11th. So hope we see you then as well. Thank you.